Hi, my name is Jeromy Mackey. I'm an English literature student, and thank you very much for watching my presentation. My project is on American populism and speeches, from Bryan to Trump and Sanders. Now, a little bit about me and why I chose to do this project. Like I said, my name is Jeromy Mackey. I'm an English lit student, but I'm pursuing in graduate school a master's degree in public administration. And I wanted to do a project that combined my understanding of literary analysis, as well as policy, politics, and political ideology. So why populism? Well, in recent years, the word populist has become a word that is used a lot in our description of different political leaders and movements. And that ambiguity of what populism is a scholarly issue still very much relevant. What was the project going to be? I wanted to create a project that furthers the understanding of populism in modern American rhetoric. So I tried to narrow it down as much as I could to, like, when we look at modern speeches by modern political leaders, what makes it populist and what doesn't. Now, the methodology of creating these analyses was, first, form a critical basis for what is populism. Secondly, determine a system for how populism is communicated. Third, use an established speech from before the modern political era that is American and fundamental to the cultural identity of American populism. In this case, I chose the Cross of Gold speech given by Jennings Bryan, an outsider at the Democratic National Convention who won the nomination because of his successful populistic speech, kind of the beginning of that trend of speaking to the pure people, which we'll get into, to establish themselves as a competitive politician. And using these three sets of concepts, I want to do this to compare the bipartisan populism we saw in the 2016 election cycle. You had Donald Trump on the Republican Party, and I would say one of his key issues was immigration, where you see a lot of populist rhetoric, and then Bernie Sanders in the same case as healthcare. Both of these members faced resistance from their party, but beat expectations because of their successful populist movements. So getting into that first aspect, what is populism? The primary scholars that I used were Mood and Kaltwasser. They summarized their work in Populism, a very short introduction by the Oxford Press. And in this, they talk about three core concepts that have to be present in populism. First, the people, the pure people, who feel frustrated and ignored. These are the people who don't feel represented by their politicians anymore. And in populism, the perspective that the populist leader has to create is that these people aren't being served anymore by the people that they elected or are being led by, if it's not a democracy. Secondly, you have the elite, the corrupt elite. They've forgotten the people, and a key important is they're using their positions to further themselves or their colleagues. So it's not just that they're out of touch, but they're intentionally using their platform and position to benefit those who are not the people of the nation. And three, this is a very important point that I wish I could discuss more in the presentation, but the general will. So the general will is a distinct presented will of the people, not necessarily the majority outright. The way it's described is it's the collective will of people who are willing to organize and do something about it, not just whatever the most popular opinion may be at that time. It's where you get ideas such as like the silent majority was talked a lot about in the 2016 election when Trump won, because people weren't expecting that and had a misrepresented idea of what the political climate was. Like I said here, it opens access to the minority, which often is led by the populist movement. In addition to populism and those three core concepts, of course, you have to have your populist leader. They're the figurehead. And here's a couple of different points that make up that populist leader. Vox populi is a Latin term that means voice of the people. So again, the primary goal of this populist leader is to make himself be, I am your voice. You haven't had one yet. I'm speaking for you. I am your champion. You also have cult of the leader. In a lot of populist situations, you have people who become extremely devoted to the idea of the person itself and not even their policies. And then the next 2 points are two different kinds of populist leaders. The most known and most thought of through history is the charismatic strongmen. You have Hugo Chavez, Nigel Farage, Donald Trump. And then you also have the outsider, which is more along the lines of what Bernie Sanders ends up being, because he isn't necessarily a strongman, but he's always felt like a political outsider in Washington and uses that to make the people who are outside of politics feel included. And they have to be charismatic. Populism, and you'll see that in the Cross of Gold speech, depends solely on the verbal power and communicative power of their leaders. These people are less concerned with policy and more concerned with feeling that they are being heard. So how is it communicated? Well, in Blocking the Greens, the populist communication style towards a critical framework, their study was actually perfectly fitted for this project. It's a contemporary look at communication style of populism and its system in the area of mediation. Excuse me. It is due to mediation that has created a direct connection between populist leaders and their people, allowing for large populist movements in a smaller amount of time than we've previously seen before. They used similar methodology. They used two ideologically opposed leaders. They weren't directly connected. They were from different time frames. You had Hugo Chavez and Nigel Farage, which I've already mentioned in the presentation. And their three core concepts of how populism is communicated is identity, establishing an identity, who is the people that you're representing, what connects us, rhetoric, how you convince them, and the use of the media. So that gets us now into our first speech, the one I'll really talk about the most in this presentation for the sake of time. So the Cross and Gold speech was a speech given by William Jennings Bryan on the divide between bimetallism and the gold standard in the 1896 Democratic National Convention. William Jennings Bryan was in support of bimetallism, which was the unpopular opinion amongst his party, and he was going into this as the underdog because of that political view that he had. Knowing this, Bryan manifests mood and Walser's concepts that reflect cultural identity of populism in America. So first, we have identity, which is the block and the green first step in the communication process. And the identity that he creates of the people is a sense of geographic and financial classism. So this first quote that I've pulled from the speech is, "The man who is employed for wages is as much a businessman as his employer. The attorney in a country town is as much a businessman as the corporation counsel in a great metropolis. The merchant at the crossroads store is as much a businessman as the merchant of New York. The farmer who goes forth in the morning and toils all day." So you have this sense of lower income working class and the managerial class, but also the geographic divide of the East Coast and the Atlantic that get characterized as the elite. It's this already divide that we see constantly in American politics of urban and rural, the disconnect between those two, since so many politicians may come from those urban backgrounds. Another aspect of identity is nationalism and patriotism. At the end of the speech, Bryan kind of rebukes the idea that the United States should wait to be ready for foreign aid to do bimetallism. He says if they say bimetallism is good, but that we cannot have it until other nations help us, we reply that instead of having a gold standard because England has, we will restore bimetallism and then let England have bimetallism because the United States has it. So caring less about the concept of what are other people doing. A similar example I always think of is the metric system. It's this idea of like, we have a way of doing things. Let's be the example and the standard. And that sense of pride and nationalism is something that unites a populist base. They reject globalist reasons and put the motivations of America and its people first. We also have his use of rhetoric, and this is also really important when you see in 2016. So pacifistic calls to action. Even though our country was founded upon revolution and revolutionary ideas, a lot of populist leaders know that outright calls for action can lead to violence and sometimes heightened political negativity. And so what they do is they use pacifistic calls to action. They lead with this recognizing of that, hey, we've tried to do it the way you want, establishment, and you're cutting us out. And so we have no other choice but to be defiant. Which this quote from William Jennings Bryan is a really good example of his speech writing and rhetoric in constructing that image. We do not come as aggressors. Our war is not a war of conquest. We are fighting in defense of our homes, our families, and posterity. We have petitioned, and our petitions have been scorned. We have entreated, and our entreaties have been disregarded. We have begged, and they have mocked when our calamity came. We beg no longer. We entreat no more. We petition no more. We defy them. So he uses anaphora here to repeat the phrase of the thing that they were rejected on, to say, now we're going to do it and not do it the way that they want anymore. We were going to do it defiantly in an active present tense. And that brings us to the present and what the bulk of the comprehensive part of the project is. So in 2016, we saw two populist leaders merge in both parties. We have Trump characterizing the swamp of Washington, the political establishment in general, as the corrupt elite. Immigration specifically was an issue. He gives a landmark speech in 2016 in Arizona, only a couple months before the general election, on how immigration shouldn't be about how people get into the country, shouldn't be about how we offer and help those people getting to the country, but it should be only about the will and the benefit of the American people. And that currently the current establishment is only serving themselves and their colleagues. Sanders, on the other side, also characterizes a sense of the political establishment as the corrupt elite, a lot less explicitly, a lot less antagonistically, but it's the Democratic Party. It's his party that he caucuses with. He's an independent that he's running with for the Democratic nomination. And he kind of presents his whole political career as always kind of getting resistance for his socially democratic, progressive ideology. His key issue is healthcare. And so this idea of like the working class Democrat doesn't care so much about a lot of the issues being presented on the platform. They need healthcare. And then the upper class Democrats, the political Democrats, may be afraid to do that because of alienating corporate healthcare in America. And so that's the case that Sanders makes. The pure people want universal healthcare. The corrupt elite want to serve corporate America and corporate healthcare in America. And that's where that resistance comes from. And interestingly, Sanders loses the nomination, Trump wins the nomination, and Trump wins the presidency. And so you had these, you had these two leaders emerge from both of these parties, and the one that won the nomination ends up winning. So you see this rise in populism at this really pivotal moment in United States history. And both leaders faced an unexpected resistance, but even though Sanders did not win the nomination, his success was still much higher than was previously expected, showing that the kind of lightning rod nature of populism and how it can energize a political movement. And here are my works cited for this presentation. Like I said, the presentation will hopefully further this understanding of what American populism looks like by looking at two modern political figureheads and their issues and how they feel they are servicing the American people. And it's a literary look at how those speeches accomplish those goals through rhetoric and identity and the use of the media. Thank you very much for watching my presentation.